Salutations, my friends, and thank you for tuning in to another edition of the Catching Trends segment. I have titled this one Poisonous Panaceas simply because we're going to be looking at things like the vaccines, the pharmacological industry, big pharma, things like Monsanto, Bayer, and how you see all these adverse effects that you usually get from trying to fix one problem. That and as well as Obama's new global health security agenda. But with that being said, let's jump right into it. Well, I'm sure you're starting to wonder, what the heck is the global health security agenda? Well, let me knock that out for you. Last Friday, November 4th, Obama quietly signed an executive order titled Advancing the Global Health Security Agenda to Achieve a World Safe and Secure from Infectious Disease Threats. That's a whole lot. This is why we usually just say the Global Health Security Agenda or the GHSA. Alright, it is the policy of the United States to advance the Global Health Security Agenda, which is a multifaceted, multi-country initiative intended to accelerate partner countries' measurable capabilities to achieve specific threats or specific targets to prevent, detect, and respond to infectious disease threats. Whether naturally occurring, deliberate, or accidental. So basically, the agenda is to push vaccines and normalize quarantine procedures across nations during outbreaks. And this is whenever you can look at things like the Senate bill, SB 277 and SB 279, which are basically just that, mandated vaccines for children. And I'll get into that later on in the actual video. The Global Health Security Immunization Agenda states that participating countries must have, quote, a functioning national vaccine delivery system with nationwide reach, effective distributions, access for marginalized populations, adequate cold chain, and ongoing quality control. At least 90% coverage of the country's 15-month-old population with at least one dose of measles containing vaccines. Okay, and let me just run through that one more time for you guys. A functioning national vaccine delivery system with nationwide reach, effective distributions, access for marginalized populations, adequate cold chain, and ongoing quality control. At least 90% coverage of the country's 15-month-old population with at least one dose of measles containing vaccines. I'm sure you're wondering, well, why are they starting with 15-month-year-old? Well, it's because they have vaccines that start as soon as you come out of the womb. They have a schedule up until you're 18, really, from the moment that you're out of the womb up until you're 18. That's why this is pretty heavy. But right here, where it says some notable 5-year action items include conducting routine immunization activities, implementing case-based surveillance, achieving and documenting vaccination of healthcare workers. So unfortunately for the people who are involved in the healthcare field and have to have some of these mandated vaccines containing God knows what for their career choice, unfortunately you are now documented. You will have to have up-to-date ones. They could sterilize you. There are a lot of different things that could come with this kind of intrusive medicine, this kind of intrusive way of looking at things. One of the things that I'll actually try to get into later is, and we've discussed it in other videos, how the CDC has been given powers to detain people. If there's any kind of pandemic, if there's any kind of situation like that, they're able to quarantine you. They're able to detain you and then put you through the quarantine procedures. Now, I know that seems a little bit far-fetched, unneeded, and, not necessary. But we're living in an age where people can biohack. We're living in an age where people can make bombs out of everything that's underneath their kitchen sink. We're living in an age where children can build nuclear reactors out of, off of their allowance. So creating a genetically specific bomb or even creating some kind of bioterrorism device, it would be relatively easy. This will give the CDC the powers and the Global Health Security Agenda a reason to go into effect, to detain people, to put them either in, I'm not saying in FEMA camps, but to put them in quarantine zones, to do different types of things like this. That's why we have got to maintain our health, because whenever it gets to these levels, whenever it's as intrusive as this, we have to really realize what's going to happen, not only to ourselves, but to others and society, the freedoms that we'll have, the rights that we'll have. You see. So speaking of rights, What about human rights? What about our rights? What about our rights to exist? What am I trying to say? When we're looking at things like the Flint water crisis, we're looking at the destruction of human rights. We're looking at those types of things being trashed. This is a representation of a larger goal. Like I said before, when we look at these types of things, we have to realize what they mean in a larger context. People are now figuring out, or at least scientists are catching up to theorists and researchers alone, like, private researchers, that fluoride causes hypothyroidism, leading to depression, weight gain, and worse. And pesticides that's actually found in the waters, it's harmful. Who would have thought? Who would have thought consuming fluoride, all kinds of chemicals, all kinds of pesticides even, that would be bad for you, right? Well, now they're actually discovering that. Well, this is part of an organized thing to dehumanize us, to depopulate us, to make us infertile and sterile, to make us less than, to make us less human, to dumb us down. It's part of the systemic dumbing down of America, and not only America, but the entire world, you see. So this isn't some crazy conspiracy theory. There are people who are actually doing research into this. I'm going to actually read from the article, and it's from researchers who conducted actually the largest investigation into the effects of fluoride in the UK. So with that being said, let me say this. 2 damning studies on the effects of fluoride in our water have been released in the hope that it will wake people up to this real problem. It is a very real issue. Okay, researchers at the University of Kent are the latest establishment to have studied this growing problem. The extensive study involved them looking at data from nearly every single medical practice in England, and they found that fluoride may be increasing the risk of hypothyroidism, or an underactive thyroid, a condition in which the thyroid gland fails to produce enough hormones, resulting in symptoms such as fatigue and obesity and depression. The study, published in the Journal of Epidemiology and Community Health, included the largest population ever to be analyzed in relation to fluoride consumption. The data was collected from 99% of the 8,020 general medical practices in England, and the results showed locations with fluoridated water were 30% more likely to have high levels of hypothyroidism compared to areas with low natural levels of the chemical in the water. Think about that. This means that as many as 15,000 people could be suffering from depression, weight gain, fatigue, and aching muscles, which could be cured if the fluoride problem was solved. If the fluoride problem was solved. Overall, there were more than 9% cases of underactive thyroid in fluoridated places. Think about that, guys. Let that just really simmer in for a second. If you don't know about the fluoride, the pesticides, all the other things that they put, how they treat the water, this, that, and the third, if you don't know that they are running all kinds of different chemicals through your house, even just to keep your water warm, to treat it, to make it, air quote, clean, purify it, distill it, this is what you need to do on your own. This is why you need to get a water filter. This is why you need to get something that purifies what you're consuming, because you are what you eat, clearly. And if the water that you're consuming, gives you depression, weight gain, if you can taste that it's off, it makes your mouth chalky, well, then you're probably like the people in Flint, Michigan, who are dealing with the Flint water crisis, who are dealing with lead in their waters. And this is what we're dealing with. That is, if anything, something that the UN should look into, or one of the presidents. Why do we have a failing infrastructure? You see, but they're trying to offer us the global health security agenda. Obamacare. International health care. While our country is failing. So there is a solution right there, but at the same time, what's being done about it in the present? There are people, like I said, in Flint, Michigan, who are having rashes as results, hair loss, because of all of this. Because of this not negligence, not ignorance. This is, I'm not even sure what you would call it. But this is now happening, and this is affecting us in more ways than one. Like I keep saying in a lot of my episodes, the epigenetic factors. What does this do to our biology? What does this do to our chemistry? How does this affect how we interact with the earth, as well as the universe as a whole, with society, basically? So moving on, as far as messing with things as our epigenetics, let's look at something that I want to call, or something that I'm looking into as far as synthetic biology. They're trying to manufacture diseases, design drugs, design diseases, designer diseases, really. And think about that. I mean, it's bacteria. But what do we know about bacteria already? What do we know about them trying to design some of these not demons, some of these drugs, some of these diseases? Zika, Bill Gates, the Rockefeller Foundation, South America, 2014, genetically modifying all kinds of nonsense, having a patent on a specific disease. Let me get into this article. For the last decade or so, synthetic biologists have been reprogramming bacterial strains to serve new functions. A well-known experiment added bioluminescent genes to bacteria to make them glow, for example. Today, this is an experiment a child could carry out with a little instruction. And one of the first medical applications of this concept, SynLogic has patented a version of E. coli engineered to develop, quote, an unquenchable appetite for ammonia and turn it into the amino acid arginine, which, unlike ammonia, is harmless to the body. SynLogic's new synthetic biotic pill, which could be tested by volunteers next year, contains 1 billion of these designer bacteria, or these reprogrammed bacteria. Think about that, guys. Reprogrammed bacteria that has all kinds of different variations that are man-made. They could easily be injected into you, either by syringe or by pill. I'm sure they would have some kind of cool abrasive powder that you could just put on your... No, we're not there. We're not there yet. But think about that. This is what we're doing. Seriously, this is where we're at. And sure, your parents might have taken Tylenol and Advil, or they may have given you ginger root and ginger ale for whenever you were sick. That's natural to some degree. It's almost comedic. But they gave you chamomile, or they gave you lemon juice and lemon teas, things like this. But now, with where we are in society, look at things like AstraZeneca. Those crazy people. When you try to literally fix one problem, you end up developing at least like 12, 13, 14 more. You see, like I keep saying, the epigenetic factors of this is what contains 1 billion of the programmed bacteria. Guys, think about that. What is that going to do to you after a while? And if they're all synthetic, does that mean that your body's going to react to them? I'm sure, they've all done their tests, and they've all, released them, and their data looks fine and sound. I'm sure if they investigated themselves that they would find nothing wrong. But how does that work? How does it work whenever you're not necessarily taking into consideration what people are consuming themselves? As well as, like I like to say with other things, the food that is also altering us. And the chemtrails, and there's a lot of other societal factors that you have to include when looking at these types of synthetic biological things being introduced into your body, into your system. I'm not a scientist, clearly. Clearly not a scientist. But I'm just thinking, layman's term, what happens whenever we start introducing all kinds of, clearly alien or foreign stimuli into our system? And that's one thing that I really think people should really start trying to think of whenever we talk about vaccines, whenever we talk about medicine, pharmacy, the big pharma, anything like that. And I'll get into that as well, things like Monsanto and Bayer coming together. But that's the angle I'm really trying to come at right now for you guys, is to understand that this synthetic biology, though it seems good on the surface, we need to understand what it does to us in the long term. Speaking of things in the long term, I don't want to sound like a creep or anybody weird like that, but we should really start watching what's happening to our children. We should really start paying attention to what's happening to the next generation. If we are already facing some of these adversarial things, I really do pray for the children because of what they are really trying to do to them. But with that being said, check this out. More mandatory vaccinations. Outside of California, Maryland is now banning children due to them not having the government-mandated vaccines. And if you don't think that's scary, or if you think that's perfectly fine, well, I can understand your point. You want a child that's perfectly safe and fine. You would like to believe and have faith in all that, that these drugs are chemically intoxicating your children and your child for the right way. You're more than fine to believe that. I'm used to being called crazy. I would prefer for my child, if I ever have any, to acquire the sickness naturally. I'm sorry, I don't want to prevent them from something that I naturally experience myself. Like I said, we really have to understand what is happening not only to us, but to our children. Our parents, they probably had to deal with this to some degree as well. However, this is now our hurdle. This is now our battle that we have got to conquer. And I'm ranting, so let me get into this article. Mandatory vaccinations are about to open up a new frontier for governmental control. Through the war on drugs, bureaucrats arbitrarily dictate what people can and can't put into their bodies. But that violation pales in comparison to forcibly medicating millions against their will. Voluntary and informed consent are essential in securing individual rights, and without it, self-ownership will never be respected. And this is why, if anything, I'm trying to point out to you guys that you've got to be informed. You've got to be aware. I'm about to go over how California is a prime example of how invasive these types of things can get. The liberal stronghold of California is trailblazing the encroaching new practice and recently passed laws mandating that children and adults must have certain immunizations before being able to attend schools or work in certain professions. The long-standing religious and philosophical exemptions that protect freedom of choice have been systematically crushed by the state. California's Senate Bill, SB 277, went into effect July 1st, 2016, and marked the most rigid requirements ever instituted for vaccination. The law forces students to endure a total of 40 doses to complete the 10 federally regulated or recommended vaccines, while allowing more to be added at any time. Any family that does not go along will have their child barred from attending licensed daycare facilities, in-home daycares, private and public schools, and even after-school daycare programs. Well, that's fantastic. I mean, I guess they can't go to after-school Satan. Hey, that's the insanity that I'm making a joke of because of the days that we're living in, guys. Think about how wild that is. I literally just told you that as of July 1st, 2016, until anybody decides to knock this bill off, you cannot go to a public school without having a government-mandated vaccination shot. And I know that sounds silly. It really does. But think about how many that you've had as a child up until now. How many will your child have? I won't tell you how many they have to have by the age of 7. But I will tell you to go do your own research. I will tell you that these mandatory vaccines are getting out of control. I will tell you that there are some deaths associated to the lethality of these vaccines. I will tell you that this should not be occurring. They should not have a vaccine schedule for the moment that you are out of the womb to the moment that you're out of the house, 18. You see, they're chemically neutering you. They are chemically altering you. And this is a very, very real issue. This is a pandemic, if you ask me. And because people can't seem to understand how big that truly can be, how wild that is, people being able to literally force a syringe into your skin and then just, boom, just like that, you're done. Just like that, you can never have kids again. You can never walk, or you can never talk, or your child. You see where I'm going with this? There are all kinds of issues that we have to look at when we start thinking about how lethal these mandatory vaccines can be. So let me talk about something real quick about, the lethality of these vaccines. The Clinton Health Access Initiative distributed watered-down HIV/AIDS drugs to people in sub-Saharan Africa, increasing the likelihood or morbidity and mortality. according to a draft congressional report. The report was obtained by the Daily Caller News Foundation and is titled The Clinton Foundation and the India Success Story. Representative Marsha Blackburn, a Republican of Tennessee, vice chair of the House Energy and Commerce Committee, initiated the report. Richard Pollack reports that the Clinton Health Access Initiative program to help AIDS victims is considered to one of the Clinton Foundation's most important contributions and is probably its best known initiative. The congressional report focused on the Clintons' decade-long relationship with a controversial Indian drug manufacturer called Ranbaxy, which CHI, the Clinton Health Access Initiative, used as its main distributors of those HIV drugs to third world countries. So I'm not talking smack about the Clintons, but I'm also talking smack about the Clintons. Because if you're also looking at this, you can see that Melinda Gates down there is also trying to push vaccines under the guise of women's pay gap. What that basically means is things like no prick, no pay, or no jab, no pay. This is a initiative in Australia where basically if you don't have these mandatory vaccines, if you don't have these shots, if you don't have your welfare vaccinations, your welfare immunizations, you will not receive your check, you will not receive your pay, you will not receive your money as provided by the state. More of these types of things are going to happen. Melinda Gates, she pushes for these types of things because her and her husband of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they also manufacture some of these faulty drugs and faulty vaccines that we've also seen in Africa. This is why, I have a villainous hatred towards Bill Gates. What is it that I'm trying to get towards you guys, or to you guys, in this overall concept, is that these drugs that they're sending to us, some of them, as you're very well aware, actually contain the disease that you're trying to fight. And usually what happens is if you have a surplus of one, then you'll lack the other one. What I'm trying to say is they put more of the actual drugs or more of the actual disease in the cure than vice versa. And so what's happening is we're seeing more people actually succumb to, like I said, the lethality of these drugs, of these vaccines, of this kind of medical treatment. You see, of these poisonous panaceas. So that's why we have to really look at what it means, or what it truly means to put these things in our body. Do we really want to take the shortcut to be cured, or is it worth a few pains? Is you see? And that's what people really need to start understanding, because I have one more thing that I really want to get across to you guys, and then, I'm going to wrap this video up for you. Boom, murderous Monsanto and genocidal glyphosate. The fact that scientists have been told to remain silent on the glyphosate cancer findings, while Monsanto's herbicide glyphosate has been found in vaccines. But shocker, guess what? Bayer bought Monsanto for $66 billion. So how long do you think these types of practices were occurring? How long do you think that these types of things have been going on? Let me get into this article. In a letter, officials from the International Agency for Research on Cancer, IARC, warned scientists against disclosing information from a 2015 study that suggests that Monsanto's weed killer Roundup is carcinogenic. AgWeb.com reports the World Health Organization International Agency for Research on Cancer, IARC, from, WHO, distributed a report in 2015 calling the weed killer probably carcinogenic. Makers of the product say the claim is false, citing their own research into the product. Well, of course it would be false. They cited their own research into the product. Since then, several groups using Freedom of Information laws have asked for documents relating to how the IRC decision was made, including scientists on the panel that live and work in the U.S. at U.S. institutions. So think about that, guys. Let me just let that simmer for a second. They're purposely telling people that, well, yeah, it's probably a carcinogenic, but the claim is false. Our research says so. There's nothing wrong here. There's nothing to see. Everything is perfectly fine. Continue on as you're going. While more and more of these glyphosate cancers are coming up, while these epigenetic cancers are starting to come up, these, how would you put it, superbugs, these drug-resistant diseases, all of these different things that are coming up because of what we're putting in our body, what we're putting in our food, what we're putting in the atmosphere, what we're putting into our surroundings. You see, there's so many different angles that you have to look at this, and the angle that I just keep trying to come back to is the epigenetic factor, the legacy factor. What happens to our children? What happens to us at some subtle degree now over a gradual time? But what happens to the next generation and the generation after that? Will mutations occur? What is the actual source of this? Why are more cancers coming? These are all different types of questions that, unfortunately, I don't think Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton will ever answer. And that is the truth. And I've resolved that. This is why I'm trying to tell you the best thing that I know how to do right now is to purify your water, grow your own food, get in good with the organic farmers around you, know what you're actually intaking, get your vitamins on point, make sure you're actually trying to purify your system, and don't intake so much of this over-processed food. If any. There are a number of different things that I could say, but what I'm overall trying to get across to you guys is be very well aware of the times that we are in and understand that we have a lot of things going against us, and acting ignorant of them will not get them out of our face. However, that's all I really got for you guys. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. Feel free to email me. I'll have it in the description bar below. And as always, guys, stay vigilant, expose lies, and share truth. This is Noise Era, Freedom Faction, out.